It's time for the Texas Perspective on current news and events. A man who calls it like he sees it, without the normal political correctness you may have grown comfortable with. This show is not for the faint of heart or easily offended. Chances are you will learn something and along the way get to hear some great music from bands you may have missed. The doctor is in, and he will see you now.
Well, I guess we better get on with it.
Good morning. It's Saturday, and of course, this is the Saturday show, and that means one thing. It's a full hour today, and I got a lot of mo for you. So let's get started in the first segment. When Donald Trump moved to fire the Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook this week, he touched off an immediate debate about what the law means when it says Fed governor can be removed only for cause. But what if that rule that the president can remove the Federal Reserve official only for cause simply disappeared? That's exactly what happened in 1933. In the legislative blitz to stabilize a collapsing banking system, Congress quietly dropped the for-clause language that had anchored the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, which, of course, you can read about in The Creature from Jekyll Island, a truly great book that you can get on Amazon. Anyway, the Federal Reserve Act. For nearly 2 years on paper, the Washington Board's appointed members served at the president's pleasure. Even stranger, hardly anyone noticed. This discovery came in 1935 during hearings on the next big banking bill when senators realized that the old safeguard had gone missing. Senate hearings on the bill began April 9th, and for weeks they proceeded as if this, quote, for clause, unquote, language remained in the bill. Over in the House, deliberation over the legislation similarly assumed the president could not remove a Fed official except for a cause. Once again, I want to remind you that the Federal Reserve Bank is not federal. It's a privately owned bank that is owned by European families. They signed a contract with a traitor to the United States known as Woodrow Wilson. Yes, I know he was the president, but he was also the traitor that destroyed America. And the Federal Reserve is simply a private banking institution. It's not even a corporation. It doesn't have any board members. Nobody gets to vote. It's the roughly 7 families that own the Federal Reserve, and they have absolute control over America's banking system. And thus, they get a piece of every penny that you spend. If you buy a pack of gum, these European families get paid. The other thing is the Federal Reserve Bank has never been audited. Have you ever heard of a bank that has never one time been audited? Most banks get audited every 5 years. Some of them get audited every 2 or 3 years. Some of them get audited annually. But the Federal Reserve Bank has never been audited. So anyway, I just want you to remember that. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It's a private bank. And number 2, it's never been audited. Getting back to the story here, which is from Breitbart, thank you very much. So, deliberation over the legislation assumed that the president could not remove federal officials except for cause. It was not until May 15th that Winthrop Aldrich, the chairman of the Chase National Bank and the son of Nelson Wellmarth Aldrich, who was one of the key architects of the central banking system that became the Federal Reserve Bank, brought to the attention of the committee the fact that the current law no longer required such cause. Senator Carter Glass of Virginia, another of the architects of the Federal Reserve Bank, admitted he must have been asleep when it slipped through. Aldrich said this highlighted the danger of hasty regulation or hasty legislation. Glass, however, saw something more nefarious at work. He said, I do not know that it was due to hasty action. I think it may have been due to covert action. I never heard of it until the other day. The timing of the debates over the bill was everything. The Democrats held lopsided majorities in both chambers, 69 of the 96 Senate seats and 322 of the 435 House seats. Franklin Delano Roosevelt remained popular despite the ongoing depression, and many lawmakers across party lines blamed the Federal Reserve Bank's early Depression policy mistakes for deepening the economic catastrophe. And I can tell you that the view of most serious economists today is that the Depression was lengthened by the Federal Reserve Bank, not shortened. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court was systematically dismantling Roosevelt's agenda. Schechter Poultry had struck down industrial codes. The Railroad Retirement Board versus Alton had invalidated pension plans. Louisville Joint Stock Land Bank versus Radford had gutted farm relief, and more defeats loomed on the horizon. In this climate, the last thing the Democrats on the Hill wanted was a bench of unelected conservative justices, yet another tool to second-guess whether an elected president had sufficient cause to remove federal banking officials. Once again, Federal Reserve Bank is not federal. It's a privately owned, family-owned bank. So anyway, they hatched the court to block Roosevelt at every turn. I mean, why create another opening for judicial interference, they said. The backdrop makes Congress's ultimate choice all the more revealing. The Supreme Court's decision in Humphrey's Executor versus the United States landed like a thunderbolt in May of 1935, right in the middle of banking reform deliberations. This case involved Roosevelt's attempt to fire the FTC commissioner, that'd be the Federal Trade Commissioner, and it contained precise language. Officials could be removed for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office, but for no other cause. Well, I think that pretty much covers everything that they do at the Federal Reserve. Anyway, the court upheld the restrictive formula and struck down Roosevelt's dismissal. Here was a ready-made template, tested, approved, and freshly minted by the Supreme Court itself. Congress could have simply copied the FTC's enumerated grounds into the Federal Reserve Act. The legal path was clear, and the precedent was brand new. But instead, lawmakers chose a completely different route. When senators put pen to paper, they restored the removal protection, but kept the deliberately sparse Fed governors could be removed for cause by the president. When senators put pen to paper, they restored removal protection. They kept it deliberately sparse. Fed governors could be removed for cause by the president. That was it. No itemized list of acceptable reasons, no requirement to file formal charges, no notice or hearing procedures, and certainly no judicial review mechanism. Contrast this with Humphrey's Executor. It could not have been starker. Congress had seen exactly what a court-friendly removal standard looked like, and they conscientiously rejected it. In the same legislation package, lawmakers renamed the Federal Reserve Board as the Board of Governors and lengthened terms to 14 years and placed monetary policy on a more institutional footing through the Federal Open Market Committee. The design message was unmistakable. They wanted to insulate the Fed from day-to-day presidential meddling without turning judges into human resource managers for central banking. Senator Glass was explicit about the balance Congress was striking. The Fed, he insisted, was never meant to be hermetically sealed from politics. If the board pursued a course manifestly damaging to public interest, a newly elected president could, for cause stated in writing, dismiss members and change its policy. This standard required more than a mere presidential whim, however. There had to be a stated reason. But it was not designed as a trial either. When a New Jersey banker asked whether the president had to prefer charges, Glass said no. The president had to give his reasons in writing to the Senate, but he did not have to launch a charging and hearing process. Lawmakers have shown that the legalistic model in Humphrey's Executor and other statutes, they declined to adopt it, however. They opted for a political check, accountability to the Senate and to the public rather than a judicial one. In other words, Congress did not rely on courts to guarantee Fed independence. It relied on institutional architecture and its own power. 14-year staggered terms prevent the capture by any single president. Replacements require Senate confirmation. The 12-member Federal Open Market Committee blends Washington-based governors with regional Reserve Bank presidents, so one vacancy cannot flip monetary policy overnight. That's probably a good thing. The dominant Democrats were understandably resentful that unelected poobahs in the Supreme Court were thwarting the democratic will of the people by striking down New Deal legislation. They were suspicious of the unelected Fed board that they saw as having exacerbated, or perhaps even caused, the economic calamity afflicting the nation. It would have seemed ridiculous to them to set the Supreme Court up as guardians of the Federal Reserve governor's job. If you don't need legislative archaeology to reach this conclusion, just read the words, as the textualists on the Supreme Court are likely to do. Right, as Humphrey's executor blessed the FTC's enumerated formula, Congress chose the Fed's bare bones for-cause standard instead. If lawmakers wanted a court-supervised procedure, notice, hearing, record, judicial review, they knew the vocabulary, and they definitely left it out. The president is not an administrative agency subject to the Administrative Procedural Act. There is no built-in procedural scaffold to plug into. The undefined, quote, for cause, unquote, standard is open-textured by design, supplying a duty of reason rather than a blueprint for judicial trials. From a textualist perspective, there are no statutory grounds for the judiciary to create a procedure and then police what counts as cause. The question of whether the president has met the burden of removing an official for cause is what the Supreme Court refers to as non-justiciable, meaning not a matter of the courts to decide. If you are unmoved by the originalism or the textualism, a common sense functional reading, this points the way. The president must state a reason tethered to the office's purposes: financial integrity, competence, public trust, but the court shouldn't turn it into a criminal-style proceeding or a running audit of motives. Well, in the case of Miss Cook, what did she do? She said that she has 2 residences and they're both primary residences. Now, that's not possible. You have to live in one, and the other is going to be a secondary home. It's just the way that it is. The fact that she did that knowingly and willingly erodes public trust, because if she's willing to cheat on this matter, what else is she willing to cheat on? And the fact is, she is one of those people that's responsible for whether or not you can get a loan at a rate that you can afford. This is a lot. I'm going to pick it up in the next segment. We got a full hour today, so stick around, guys. You have a choice, and you chose Freedom 1300.